Today, of course, is Sunday, and yesterday was Shabbos, and once a year, my family and I are invited to go to a Shabbaton. What's a Shabbaton? It's like a marathon, walkathon, Shabbos-thon, but they just call it a Shabbaton. I don't know why. It should be a Shabbathon, but it's a Shabbaton, which basically means that it's a celebration. It's a Shabbos, a getaway Shabbos. And as you perhaps know, my wife teaches in the all-girls high school here in Houston. She's like kind of the assistant principal of sorts. She's been teaching here for many years. And last year, I was recruited as a teacher myself. And last year and this year, I've been giving classes to the juniors and seniors twice a week, Monday and Wednesday mornings. It's only 40 minutes. And I don't really need to prepare because it's subjects that I'm fairly familiar with. So we're both teachers in the school, and once a year they have a Shabbaton where they rent a big ranch somewhere out in Texas, somewhere like an hour, 2 hours away from Houston. And they make all the food and they rent it out, and there are cabins and lodges, and they just enjoy the Shabbos there. And it's a wonderful experience, a team building experience for the students. And it's a nice getaway Shabbos for the staff, some of the staff that join. And it's just a delightful experience. And they have, of course, a full schedule of events. And of course, the Shabbos meals are celebrated in a very lavish fashion. And basically every year, we've been going out for 4 or 5 years. They asked me to give like a keynote address, a speech. I'm very honored. So I spoke Friday night. And they also have a panel. All the rabbis, Ask the Rabbi panel. And there was a little bit of a controversy about this last year because the previous year, I was on the panel, but I really dominated the panel. And some of my co-panelists were a little bit overshadowed, and I was interjecting. I was being a little bit aggressive, I have to say. I was. And then they said, well, maybe Rabbi Wolbe shouldn't be invited back to the panel because he's too aggressive a panelist. And maybe we should just let him give a speech by himself so he doesn't have to interrupt anyone or interject or go off on long tangents, and everyone else could be part of the panel. And I fomented a little bit of a student rebellion. I told my students last year, I said they want to disinvite me from the panel. Why? Because I make it interesting, I make it spicy, I make it exciting, and I engage in debate, and I fight back, and I interject, and I challenge the questioner, and I challenge the assumptions. So the students, they said to the powers that be, you cannot disinvite Rabbi Wolbe from the panel. So they agreed to let me be in the panel, and I was a little bit more toned down last year. But apparently, when you have a reputation, it's hard to kick the reputation. So I have this reputation as being a little bit of a disruptive force on the panels. So this year, they said, okay, you're welcome back to the panel, but please don't overshadow your co-panelists, and please don't go too long in your answers, and please don't challenge the moderator, and so on, and so on, and so on. And they had assembled a list of questions from the students that were collected over the year, and they distributed the questions to my fellow co-panelists. But they said, Rabbi Wolbe, we're not giving you the questions. We want to put you at a little bit of a disadvantage compared to the other panelists because we want to even the playing field. But anyhow, someone snuck me the list of questions anyhow. And I'm very happy he did because some of the questions, it was a little bit of a different style of questions this year than previous years. It was less philosophical, it was more like personal. And at least one of the questions I had to kind of think about. It was a really good question, a really provocative question, and one that I really hadn't thought about. So I was glad I had some time ahead of time to ruminate upon these questions. But anyhow, when we got to the panel, it was almost like everyone was against me, okay? And I kind of relished it, I have to say. There was a little bit of they ganged up against me, and the moderator was against me. It was like a 4-on-1, but that's okay. I enjoyed it anyhow, but I wanted to go through some of the questions with y'all today because I have them here. And some of them were very provocative questions, very interesting questions. Some of them were philosophical. Some of them were more about, the personal questions. And I thought it would be valuable to discuss it today without the pressure of the moderator, without them muting my microphone during someone else's answer. We didn't actually have microphones, of course, it's Shabbos, but conceptually, let's begin. So the first question, I'm going to read to you the actual text of the question. Just because I have it over here in front of me, I got access to this document. Is there a reason to daven? Now, if that word does not sound familiar, it's because it's not an English word. Daven means to pray. Is there a reason to daven, to pray for something smaller so it's more likely it will happen? And then there's a parenthesis. For example, if someone is sick, daven, again, that word again, daven means to pray. Daven for another year instead of getting totally better. This is the question that was the first question of this discussion on the panel. And the question is, suppose you have something you want to pray for. And you can pray for everything, go for the gold, or you can pray for something a little bit more modest. Is it better, or is there a reason to pray for something smaller so it's more likely it will happen? Now, as someone who's answering the question, I have to first evaluate whether this is a good question or not. I think it's a good question, but I think there's a flaw in the question. There's an assumption in the question I think that has to at least be clarified. So that's why it's a little bit of a tricky question to answer, because I think the question could be a good question, but you have to clarify the assumptions first. The basic assumption of the question is that suppose you're praying, you're lobbying God, you're petitioning God to get something. Getting something small is easier than getting something big. That's the assumption of the question. And therefore, maybe you should forego the big thing and just pray for the small thing. That's the assumption of the question. But it did not explain to me why. Why is it easier to get something small versus something big? So the first thing I want to clarify is that point. Is it indeed easier to get something small than it is to get something big? I think the answer is yes, but it's not clarified in the question as to why. If we think that it's easier to get something small than to get something big because it's easier for God to give you something small than it is for God to give you something big, in my opinion, that's a very flawed assumption. For God to make your heart pump as it did in the last 5 seconds, I presume, as it does, 60, 80, 100, 40 times a minute, depending on how good your aerobic exercise are and how good your cardio is. Your heart's been beating, right? Well, who tells your heart to beat? So we believe that the Almighty is involved in every aspect of the world's existence and continued existence. So on a certain level, we can say that the Almighty told your heart, beat. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and so on, thousands of times an hour, millions of times, of course, over our lifetime. Maybe even billions, if we get to live 30, 40, 50 years. Probably every 30 years is a billion times or so. There's a billion seconds in about 32 years. So if it beats once a second, okay, that means that a billion beats over the course of 32 years. If we think that that's easier for God than to split the sea or to overturn the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah or to tear open the heavens and appear at Mount Sinai, or to kill all the firstborn Egyptian at the strike of midnight, or to make the water for the Jews water and the water for the Egyptians blood, oh, that's a miracle. That must be so hard for God. If we say that, in my opinion, that is a severe lack of faith. Splitting of the sea is as easy for God as not splitting the sea. It's the same. It's not hard at all. So it's important for us to realize that when we are thinking about praying, we're not asking God to do something difficult for him, so to speak. There's nothing difficult for him. I had a conversation with my son, actually on the drive back from this ranch, from this location that we stayed at. And he was asking, it's a good question. How does God, keep track of everything and everyone and every star? There's billions, trillions, sextillions of stars. How does God keep track of all that? It's a good question, but it assumes that there's some sort of finiteness to God. There's some sort of limit to God. God's not limited. Zero limitations. And therefore, every single cell in your body, and you have trillions of them, the mechanisms and the activity of the cell, it's all overseen by God, ultimately. And there's no limitation. And there could be billions of people and trillions of cells per person and trillions upon trillions of stars. And who knows how many universes we're not even aware of. And the Almighty manages all of that. No problem. And it's not more difficult or less difficult. So if the assumption in this question, is it better or is it preferable sometimes? Is there an argument, a reason to pray for something smaller because it's easier to get that because it's harder for God, so to speak, to do something which is bigger, grander? That to me would be a flawed assumption. However, we do know that when you want something and it's something which maybe the system of the world was designed for you not to have, you can change that with prayer, but you need much more prayer for that. For example, the Talmud says how to get rich. How do we say this? Talmud says how to get rich. It gives us a formula which is guaranteed. And I always make the joke, if you want to find that teaching in the Talmud, and you start from the first page of the Talmud, and you go page after page after page after page to find those words, how to get rich, which is literally words in the Talmud. There are 2,711 pages in the Talmud. 2711. Think of it. 2 7-Elevens, right? Imagine 2 7-Eleven, lots and lots of coffee. 2 7-Elevens. 2 7-Eleven. That's how many pages we have in the Babylonian Talmud, not the Jerusalem Talmud. When we say Talmud, we typically mean the Babylonian Talmud. If you went page after page after page after page, you go 100 pages, you won't see it. 1,000 pages, you won't see it. 2,000 pages, you won't see it. 2,700 pages, you won't see it. 2708. 3 pages before the end of the Talmud, Talmud says, okay, now it's time. How to get rich. The Talmud will give you the answer, but yeah, got to study a lot of Talmud to get to that most exciting citation. Talmud says how to get rich and how to become wise. Now, it's observed that this Talmud seems to conflict with another teaching in the Talmud. The Talmud says that how rich you are is determined before you're born. In fact, at the moment of conception, how much wealth is going to be accorded to this person, it's already baked in to conception. It's already baked in to who you are at the most primordial stages of your existence. Accordingly, how can the Talmud say, well, how do you become rich? Well, it depends. Was it predetermined? Was it foreordained at the moment of your conception that you're going to become rich or not? If it says you'll be rich, then you'll be rich. And if not, then you won't be rich. How does the Talmud talk about how to become rich? It depends. If you had it in your destiny, then you'll be rich. Otherwise, you won't. And the commentators explain that even if a person is designed from the earliest point, from the nascent stages of their development, they're designed to be poor. That's the teaching in the Talmud. there is a way to subvert that. There is a way to transcend that. There is a way, following the Talmud's advice of how to become rich, to say, even if I am destined to be poor, there's a loophole. There's a way to overcome, so to speak, your built-in destiny and to become rich. And what's that? Talmud says you got to work very aggressively. You engage in commerce and business and work really, really, really hard. And then the Talmud says, wait a minute, a lot of people tried. There's a lot of people working really hard and sweating all day, and they're just not making a lot of money. They're barely making ends meet. And Talmud says, no, you also have to pray. You have to, if you want silver and gold, you go to the one who has silver and gold. And who's that? That's God. Li hakesef v'li azav. The gold is mine, the silver is mine, the verse says in scripture. So if you want silver and gold, you must go to he, capital H, who has the silver and gold. You gotta go to God. You gotta pray. So then Talmud says, wait a minute. If I have to pray, why did you tell me earlier that I have to do commerce and engage in business very aggressively and very assiduously and with great integrity? Which one is it? Talmud says it's both. Can't do one without the other. This is the formula, says the Talmud, for how to become rich, even if it was determined ahead of time that you won't be rich. There is a form of prayer that can help a person achieve what they are not supposed to have. That's the incredible idea in the Talmud. To defend the questioner, I will say that when someone wants to pray to achieve something that they're really not supposed to achieve, to do that, they need to pray very aggressively, very intensely, with great devotion, with great submission to God. Not just a prayer, just a one-off prayer. You might have to pray a few times. So there is this idea that even if something is accessible via prayer, you may need a lot of prayer to accomplish something which is more grand. Moshe, we're told, he wanted to go into the land of Israel. God said no. There was a point at which Moshe could have forced God's hand, so to speak. Moshe prayed 515 times, and the answer was no, 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 again and again. And he was then told, stop praying, because you've reached the point at which your prayer will force me to do something I don't want to do. So stop praying and accept your fate. We see that to achieve certain things which are against the plan, so to speak, to do that, there's a lot of prayer that's needed. Now, Moshe didn't say, I'll just pray for other things. Moshe went for the gold. And yes, he reached the point at which God said, stop, but I have never seen anyone that says, just to answer the question now, that we should pray for something smaller and not for something grander. In fact, I've seen a prayer book. I've even said some prayers from the prayer book. And what does it say? We pray to revive the dead. Is that an easy thing, little thing or not? We pray, Meloch al kala olam kul b'chvodecha, rule over the whole world. We want Messiah. Gather in all the far-flung Jews from wherever they may be. Give us our portion in your Torah. Restore the temple and the sacrifices. We're not just praying to succeed in small little things. Of course, we have to pray for that as well. But certainly, we have very aspirational prayers, and that, I think, is ideal. And I told over a story. I was cut off after 1 minute. I couldn't even speak when I was trying to answer this question. They went through 5 or 6 questions in a half hour. It wasn't enough time, and we had a bunch of panelists, and everyone was given their ability to respond. But I set over a quick story with the Chazon Ish. Now, who's the Chazon Ish? Chazon Ish is the name of a book written by a Rabbi Karelitz. And he passed away exactly 71 years ago. And he was one of the most influential, I would say he was the most influential rabbi of his time. So think of, the early 50s and the late 40s. He was the most influential rabbi in the world, I would say, I would argue. But he was born, of course, much earlier. He was born in the 19th century, in the 1800s. And there's a story about his birth. His mother was a sickly woman, and she went to the doctors of her time because she was struggling with fertility. And the doctor said, "Listen, ma'am, I have bad news. You are not going to have any children. You're not going to have any children because your body's not capable of bearing a child. So you could have a good life, a long life, healthful life, a successful life, but not one that will yield any progeny." That was a very disappointing message from the physician. But of course, the Almighty doesn't care what the physician says. And if the Almighty wants a woman to have a baby, she'll have a baby, even if it's not in the cards, biologically speaking. And the tradition is that when she prayed for a child, she said to the Almighty, "I'm praying for a child, and it's almost like praying for a miracle. Once you're going to give me a child, make it a special child. Once we're at it, make it a special child." And indeed, she bore a son, Avram Yishai, that's the Chazon Ish, and she actually ended up with 9 children after the doctor said, "Sorry, ma'am, you won't have any children." But this idea that to pray for something really big, that of course is the way that we do things. And we realize that the Almighty has no limitations. And Sarah, we read in last week's parasha, Sarah was rebuked when 3 angels, but they appeared to be just pagan travelers. They tell Abraham, "We'll be back in a year, you'll have a baby." And Sarah overhears it from the tent. Sarah laughs. She laughs because she finds this to be preposterous. Because she's long past her time of fertility. She's almost 90. Abram's almost 100. It's absurd to suggest that they'll have a baby now. And she was rebuked. Why? Hayipaleh Hashem davar, is anything beyond Hashem? So the verse says, is there anything that's completely inaccessible to God? Of course not. And indeed, she bore a child. She bore Isaac. And I told the students that this very year, there is a famous rabbi, who had his first child at the age of 88. The great rabbi, he opened up one of the most famous yeshivas in Jerusalem. His name is Rabbi Tzvi Kushalevsky. And he was married to his wife, and he was in his 80s, and she was in her 80s, and she passed, and they had no children. And the great rabbi, I think, was 82. He remarried, and he remarried a younger-ish woman, but she was in her 50s already. So typically, they say, as far as I know, that a woman's fertility really, it starts to decline after her 20s and her 30s. She can still have a child. Once it's 40, it's kind of dicey. Again, I know nothing about this. Don't listen to the rabbi who knows zero about medicine, about anything medical related. But that's what I understand. Woman's in her 50s, and it's not really in the cards anymore, at least biologically. After 6 years of marriage, he's 88, she is 56. they bore a child together. Great rabbi at the age of 88 has a little infant. What an unbelievable story. And apparently, he was always asking for blessings to have a child. That's what he wanted. He wanted to have a child. And he would go to other great rabbis of our generation and ask for a blessing to have a child. We would say this is a miracle. 56 years old. That's very, very old when it comes to, I guess, fertility, as far as I understand. 88? That's an old man. Even though he looks young and spry. You see videos of him with, it's a hysterical picture. Great rabbi, long beard, rabbinic hat, rabbinic garb, pushing a little stroller with a tiny little baby. But he's in good health, and he's dancing and jumping around. Looks amazing. But this is a reminder for all of us. Hayipalema Hashem, there is anything beyond Hashem? Nothing. We don't give up. Even when the sharp blade is upon our neck, we never give up. So it's important to ask for small things. But nothing's beyond Hashem. We ask for the big things as well. That was the first question that appeared in the discussion. Let's go to the second question, because this is a very different type of question. And in this question, they asked me to answer first. And I was being very respectful. I was deferring to my colleagues a little bit. In previous years, I would have just jumped out to the question and just debated and been all aggressive and bombastic. But I guess I matured. Either that or the threat of being kicked off the panel landed. Listen to this question. As a teenage girl in today's generation, what is a good midah? Midah is not a word in English. Midah means a character, a good attribute, a trait. What is a good midah for me to work on? That's the question. Teenage girl, today's generation, what's a good midah to work on? Now, this is a wonderful question for a lot of reasons. First of all, the whole concept of working on a midah, that's a very advanced idea. The idea that we're not perfect and we're not fully refined and there's areas of us to improve in. And it's a valuable and really an imperative quality for us to say, well, where can we improve? Is there an area that we can advance in? And someone who is a teenager, who's scheming and planning and thinking about what area to work on, to me, that shows a certain sophistication and a certain maturity. What's a good midah to work on? So how do you answer this question? The question is, what's a good midah to work on? As a teenage girl in today's generation, with that context, with that framing, what is a good midah to work on? So the first thing I said is, well, teenage girls, I know nothing about. I've never been a teenage girl. I happen to have a daughter who's a teenage girl. So maybe I have a little bit of experience, but not really enough to say something definitively. Number one, got to give a disclaimer, right? Not a physician, not a teenage girl. But then I said, first of all, it's very commendable to work on any midah, number one. And there is no midah, there's no attribute, characteristic, area of your personality and your character that if you were to work on, you wouldn't be elevated from. Anything that a person tries to advance in, any area that they try to advance in, it will elevate them in so many different ways. Moreover, this was a subtle point that I didn't have time really to develop it because I got some glowering faces from the moderators who knows I have a reputation and is trying to cut me off a little bit. That's okay. There is no midah that doesn't overlap with all other midos. If a person tries to become a more truthful person, that is not a character attribute in isolation. It's not just a discrete characteristic. It overlaps with every other part of a person's character. And therefore, if you become a more truthful person, every area of your life, even areas that they're not area of being a more truthful person, that will be impacted. So I didn't get time to really flesh this idea out. There's no area of a person's character that will not, or that working on it will not ripple throughout the entirety of their character profile. And there really is no bad answer. And therefore the area that you feel based upon your assessment, the best of your ability to make that assessment, the area that you feel is something you want to work on, something that you feel like maybe there's a need to work on it, that's what you should pursue. So that's a more general answer. But then I speculate. I said, listen, I know nothing about teenage girls, but I could still speculate. And what I said is that teenage girls, what's happening with teenage girls in this generation? A lot of media, a lot of celebrity, a lot of TikTok and Instagram, a lot of devices and apps that cause people to be sad and to feel like they're lacking, low self-esteem. People have all sorts of problems, God forbid, all sorts of eating disorders and terrible things because they have to kind of live up to a certain fake standard that they see online. I said, if you ask me the question the way I see it, anything that you can do to inoculate yourself from all the mishagas, all the nonsense that exists in the world, in the celebrity world, and in the online, the social media world, anything you can do to protect yourself from it, to inoculate yourself from it, to say that I'm a princess. I'm part of this great nation. And I have such tremendous inner value. Anything you could do in that realm, I would think, would be something that particularly a teenage girl in today's generation would be really transformed as a result. We don't give our children smartphones. My oldest son, Akiva, he got his license when he was 16. I bought a car for him on Craigslist. I allow him to do a lot. And I bought him a phone, but I bought him like a flip phone. Doesn't have access to the internet, doesn't have apps. And this is a whole discussion on its own as to why I think it's so detrimental to the advancement and to the development of teenagers to have these devices. Part of it is because all sorts of crazy things that they could see, that they could learn, that they could read about, it could be parts of the internet are a cesspool. It's really true. But in addition, someone's brain is still developing and it's still growing. Your brain is under construction. And in my opinion, as a non-professional, if you're going to have the quick dopamine hits of devices, it's going to stunt the development of your brain. So I'm very, very, very opposed to devices. I told the kids, I said, I'll buy you a gun. I'll buy you a rifle. I'll do something crazy. I'll get you a Russian tank off a surplus store. But I'm not going to get you a device. I want to be very, very tolerant of all sorts of crazy things, but not something which I think could be really detrimental. Very addictive. Very, very addictive. I think particularly teenage girls, as far as I know, can be swept away into the vortex of these devices and these apps. And it causes all sorts of emotional problems and all sorts of disorders. So that was my advice. And it's interesting. I went first in this question, but my two co-panelists, they They all agreed with me. They said this is what they would say, each one in their own way. This is what they would advise teenage girls in today's generation. I want to go through 2 more questions that came up, and then maybe we'll leave some questions for our next Ask the Rabbi series, which I like. Maybe we should do this again. Let me know. What do you think? rabbi@wolverine.com. Listen to this question. Again, I'm going to read to you word for word. If there's a word that's not in English, I will translate it for you. What is your favorite part of being frum? That is not a word in English. That's a word in Yiddish. Frum means observant of Torah law. It means observant, we could call even orthodox, but frum is a little bit more than just orthodox. It means devoted to religion. What's your favorite part? And what's your hardest part? This is a good question. What are you going to say? What are you going to say? So what I said the hardest part, we used to have a discussion. It was like a springboard to think. It was a point to ponder. It was a thought experiment. What would you do if you found out that actually you were adopted, or actually your mom didn't really convert properly, so you're not really Jewish? You're adopted, you're not really Jewish, and you've been living your whole life and been so observant and all that, but suddenly you discover you're actually not Jewish. So you're a non-Jew. You can do whatever you want. 7 Noahide laws, you can follow that, that's it. But you could do just nothing that's prohibited, really, for you. And you've been living this life with all these restrictions. You grew up observant, religious, orthodox, frum, to use the word in the question. And now the world is your oyster. What would you do? Someone would say, I'm going to Vegas. I'm going to stop off at the McDonald's, and I'm finally going to eat all this great food that I've watched the television commercials about. I said, listen, I don't want to eat a cheeseburger. To me, like cheese and meat going together, they don't go together. Zero interest in that. But it's prohibited for us to destroy the hair on our face, on the 5 junctures of our face. Meaning where the bone of the jaw meets the skull over here, like by our ear. And then by the bottom over here, by the I think it's called the jawbone. And then in the middle, by the chin. So these 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4. So top over here of the, the jaw, top of the jaw, bottom of the jaw, and by the chin. 5 points, you now destroy the hair. That's the verse in the Torah says. Now what does it mean destroy the hair? As Talmud says, it means to destroy it with a razor. If you have a razor, but there's something blocking the razor and your skin, that's okay. But an actual razor on your skin is prohibited. So your mustache, no problem to shave with the razor. No problem. Because it's not part of those 5 points. Your neck area, no problem. But those 5 points, prohibited. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. And that's why, if you want to shave, nothing wrong with that. Use an electric razor, which has like a metal block that separates the skin from the spinning razors. And even then it's important. You buy a Norelco shaver, take out the lift and cut. Because they have a technology called lift and cut where there's really 2 razors. One of them that pushes the hair and one of them that scoops from the bottom of the root really of the hair. And most halachic authorities say lift and cut would be a violation of this mitzvah. Don't use the lift and cut. You can pull out the lift and cut. It's like you take a little plier and you open up the little blades and you pull out that plastic part that goes beyond the razor and pushes the hair so the razor can cut much lower. You remove that and you have a kosher shaver. So I always used a Norelco shaver. I pulled out the lift and cut with pliers, and that's what I did. But I always really wanted to use a razor to get that really close shave. But alas, I never used it because it was a violation of the Torah. So I said, if I've discovered, God forbid, right, that I wasn't Jewish, do whatever I want, that's what I wanted to do. That's the hardest part. The hardest part of being observant is you have to shave with the less ideal razor. But then I told the students, look at me. I'm bedecked with a magnificent beard for a Wolbe. Of course, Wolbes have mediocre beards, just generally. Flamboyant, dramatic, tremendous mustaches, but mediocre beards. But look at the beard. I don't have a beard anymore. So right now I can't think of anything which is hardest. I can't think of anything which is hardest. It used to be the hardest thing was that you got to shave with the electric shaver. That's what I told the students. The truth is, I'm thinking about it now. There are some mitzvahs that are difficult, but it's not hard. Once you understand what the Almighty is doing, He's not trying to make our life miserable. He's trying to elevate us and allow us and give us the tools and the directives and the guidelines for how to overcome our inclinations. Once you understand that, well, you realize it's valuable, it's good. If you maybe start off life or your introduction to Torah is like, all these restrictions. The Almighty hates me. He wants me to be miserable. That may be a legitimate initial understanding of Torah. But once you realize that the Almighty loves us and cherishes us and wants only the best for us and loves us more than we love our own children, everything He gives us is for our benefit. We may not see the causal link between the Torah and us being elevated, but we do see that when we do connect with the Torah, we are elevated. Once you realize that, yes, it may be difficult, but that's the design. And it's not hard. It's difficult. But ultimately, it's for our benefit. That was only the end part. What's the hardest part of being frum, to use that word of the questionnaire. What's your favorite part? So it's like hard. I said it's hard for me to choose because I love it all. To be able to connect with the Almighty and His Torah and to live such an enriching life. What a beautiful way of living. But then I said, what I wanted to maybe impress upon the listeners there is that there are parts of our life that we take for granted. We don't realize how lucky we are. And I elbowed the guy sitting next to me. I said, if I have something going on, I just drop off my kids by him. I have friends in the neighborhood. I just drop off your kids by the neighbor. I said, we had family over for the festival of Sukkot. I got 5 houses. People give me their houses and 4 cars for our guests. To live in such a neighborhood where everyone knows each other, everyone trusts each other, and it's a high trust environment where you could drop off your kids by their friends and they're all living together and it's a healthy and a secure and a happy and a safe environment. Who has that? What percentage of Americans know their neighbors more than just in a courteous way? What an amazing thing. When someone needs some help, people help them. The community rallies around people who need things. When if you have a baby, they'll make you meals for a month. Take your kids out. Help you. The girls here, the 8th grade girls, or even younger, certainly the older ones, they have families in the neighborhood they just go to just pitch in. Families with young children. My daughter goes just to go help out. Yes, she does babysitting as well. But she just goes to help out. What an amazing thing. And I told the students, you don't know this, but there are people in the world that when they clock out of work on Friday, they don't interact with anyone until they clock back into the work on Monday. Live by themselves. There's so much loneliness in the world. It's so sad, so terrible. And our system is that you're just living in such a vibrant and rich environment. So I don't know if it's my favorite part of being frum, but it's certainly maybe an underappreciated part of the life that we have, the community that we have. That was my answer, even though, of course, there's a lot of different ways you could go with that question. Let's end off with the 4th question, and I'm going to schedule. We'll have another another discussion of Ask the Rabbi questions, because there's more questions here that I want to get to. And I want to also solicit questions from the audience as well. So we'll go through those questions as well. If you have one, you can always email it to me, rabbi@wobajima.com. But listen to this. Another great question. What skill, actually, let me clarify. It's a good question. I think it's written a little bit inartfully. I'm going to read to you how it's written. I probably could have written it a little bit better. What skill did you pick up when you were younger that you feel accomplished of? It's not such a great way to phrase the question. Comma, and that helps you today, question mark. Meaning, is there a skill that you worked on that you developed as a youth that made you feel really accomplished and actually benefits you till this day? Which I guess is another version of the second question that we asked, or that was asked. As a teenager, what should you work on? Meaning now as an adult, what was something that you did work on, that you did develop as a youth, that made you feel accomplished, but also benefits you today as an adult? It's a good question. And people gave all sorts of answers. The answer that I gave, this is the question that I was happy I got the questions ahead of time. Because I wouldn't have, just off the cuff, I wouldn't have a good answer, I think. I told the students that when I was in yeshiva, and I had the great privilege of studying in some of the great yeshivas in the world. I was in the yeshiva. The curriculum in the morning was 4 hours of Talmud. And in the afternoon was 4 hours of Talmud. And in the evening it was 2 hours, but if you want to stay longer, 3 hours, 4 hours of Talmud. A lot of Talmud. And yes, there's prayers, and yes, there's a Musar Seder. But basically it's all Talmud all the time. And Talmud is by far the hardest thing to study. Quantum mechanics is nothing compared to the Talmud. Certainly on a deep level. And yes, the morning was more intense, in-depth, vertical Talmud. And in the afternoon was more broad, horizontal Talmud, where you don't go as deep and try to cover more ground. And then in the evening, some people did this, some people did that. Some people would review the lecture of Talmud that you heard and restudy the Talmud now that you've had the lecture. But this is a very difficult thing to study. But I think now looking back, it's the hardest thing to study. But what I gained from it, absolutely transformative. Because the first thing it does, it forces you to think. It forces you to deploy your mind to the nth of your ability and beyond. The Talmud has been described as the greatest pencil sharpener for the mind ever. This forces you to engage and deploy your brain power in ways that nothing else does. And it's not passive. Yes, maybe as a young student, you would hear more lectures. We did 4 hours of Talmud. It's you and a study partner. That's it. And then 3 hours in the afternoon, or 3.5 hours in the afternoon. And then a lecture. You have 1 hour of lecture. You maybe have 12 hours of Talmud a day, and 1 hour of it is a lecture. You're receptive. Other times you're active. And that is a training for how to think and how to try to think clearly and how to present an argument and how to iterate an argument when you find a flaw in it. That I think really helped me and helps all the students of the yeshiva, each one on their level, to learn how to think, which is the most perhaps powerful skill that we have. Moreover, I added, the objective of a study of Talmud is to think and to try to arrive at the truth. The Talmud is so dense. To unpack it, and certainly once you're going to the commentators and the Rashi and the Tosfos and the Rambam and all the more advanced layers that and strata of the Talmud that really enhance the study, to parse things out and to find the truth. That's the ultimate goal. And you're sitting with a study partner for 4 hours and you're debating, and the ultimate goal is to arrive at the truth. So a lot of people today are fearful of debate. Oh, I don't want to offend anyone. To me, it's like my pastime. I'd love to argue. I even told my panelists that we should have not a panel, we should have a debate. It is true they still teach debate in high school, I think, even in universities. But that is, I don't want to offend anyone. Forgive me. No, let's go. Aren't we trying to find the truth? So if something I'm saying which is wrong, tell me, Rabbi, you got this wrong. And I'll say, you know what? Either you're right, and I appreciate it, or you're wrong, and I still appreciate it because we can help clarify. If I wasn't clear, now we have more clarity. So I always solicit, give me your questions, your comments, your feedback, because it can be very helpful to me. And don't worry about offending me. Don't worry. We're trying to find the truth here. This is not like you're offending my personality, or you're making fun of the way I talk like a New Yorker. My British friend, he's like, when I'm hearing you speak, I feel like I much of my New York accent has been moderated with my Canadian born wife, even though she's an American citizen, and living here in Texas for 12 years now. But I met this British guy, and he's like, I don't understand. You speak like a New Yorker, so I assume that you're dumb, but then the words that you're saying actually make sense. It's just, it's a paradox. It conflicts in my mind. I don't remember even how I got to that. But I'm comfortable with debate, and I enjoy it. Why? I think that was something that I learned in the great yeshivas. Still, to study, to think, it's the most difficult area of study, and it's the richest area of study, and it's the most powerful and transformative area of study. And I think that it gives us a great advantage in life. In every area of life, you have to use your brains. And by the way, just as an aside, the yeshiva students that go to law school do very, very, very well. Why? Because they've been trained from a very early age to think critically and to try to distill ideas to the first principles, to the underlying concepts that lie at the heart of the matter. That's what we're trained to do in the Talmud. We have a debate. Rashi says one thing, Tosfos says the other thing. And there's no way that Rashi missed out what Tosfos says. So what's his underlying concept? And where's the fundamental point of disagreement between the two sides? That's what we do every day in the Talmud and in the studies. And that's a very valuable skill. And that's what I'm to the degree that I have that skill, I feel accomplished of, which again, an inartful way of saying I feel accomplished. And I think it helps me today. That was my answer to that question. It was a delightful discussion. And I'm still learning the skill of being a good panelist. Every year I'm trying to get a little bit better at it. I did allow a certain barb, which I regretted, and I apologized. Because I get in like a combative mode, an argumentative mode, and I know I have a reputation to uphold as well. So I interjected when one of my colleagues was answering one question. I said, no, but that's not the question that was asked. You're answering a different question. So we got into a little bit of a riffraff there about that. And I apologize. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that maybe. I don't know. It wasn't so nice. But it was a delightful discussion, and I'm glad we could have a debriefing here. And maybe we'll do this again, Ask the Rabbi series. When the students were polled as to what was their favorite part of the Shabbaton, many of them said, I was told, I wasn't there when this happened, but many of them said that the Ask the Rabbi, that was their favorite part. So I said, it was too short. I would do a 3-hour marathon. Why not? Let's go. Let's debate it. But maybe I always feel like they're like ending it already now. Like we just get warmed up here. We just get warmed up over here. But it was an enjoyable Shabbos and memorable. And this is I think our 5th year going. So we enjoy it each year. My teenage boys, they're not invited. So they had to find their own place for Shabbos. So they went to my brother for Friday night. And then I made them some food for Shabbos day, and they invited their friends over. I get there, the place is covered in Truly cans, which you probably don't know what that even means. But like teenage boys, like these drinks, these like energy / a little bit of alcohol drinks. Don't judge me. Only on Shabbos. It's like 5% alcohol. Okay. It's okay. Maybe you can judge me. It's okay. You can judge me. Send me an email if you want to judge me, rabbi@bojenwood.com. But they had a good time, and they had a wonderful Shabbos, and as did we. And this was something I wanted to share with y'all today. But maybe we'll do another session of Ask the Rabbi. We'll solicit more questions. I still have more questions that were submitted on this panel. Send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and feedback, and maybe we'll do another one of these soon. If there is interest, let me know at the aforementioned email account.